Diary of a Man in Despair. Friedrich Reck. October 14, 1944.
All that was entailed, supposedly, was a single night at a hotel, and so I had come with just a small valise. They searched it for weapons. It was not a good beginning. And when I asked for a lawyer, the response was harsh. Soon I was in a cell, and standing, against regulations, on the planked bed could see out into the perfect autumn day. The right to be out in that perfection had been taken from me, stolen as surely as they have stolen from us those years that were the First World War, and those of the years of inflation of the 20s, and the Hitler years, a quarter of a century, the best of a man's life, robbed by these militarist maniacs. Across the caserne yard in the officers' quarters, moving from room to room behind the cheap curtains considered elegant these days, was a blonde of the new officer breed, very likely yesterday a lavatory attendant into whose hand, the same hand which had just been clearing away various blockages and encumbrances, you slipped 2 marks. They have come up, these people, as far as we have gone down these last 12 years, obviously, since it is our money which has raised them up. The little schizophrenic who is their leader had nothing and was nothing, but from 1918 those like him in their rage began to puff him up into what he has become. What an Augean stable that will be, the one they leave for us to clean up. Now they're marching on the parade ground. I hear this from morning to night, the latest in military marches, snappy little melodies bellowed by a leader sheep, shouted back by his flock of 250. Shattering, these idiotic songs, these faces, this spiritual castration by propaganda. They march and rumble past, here, 5 men attached to one machine, there, a lumbering behemoth belching clouds of stinking gas with 10 aboard, then another new mechanical monster with another 5. What do these iron-plated apparitions have to do with soldiers? Better take the regimental insignia off their uniforms, and sew on instead gold-threaded representations of screwdrivers, or oil cans. I want to be clear, I come from a long line of soldiers. At 17, on a horse behind the silver kettle drums, that is exactly what I felt myself to be, a soldier. But the coming of the machine gun and the 4-cylinder engine has raised a question, and that is, does the profession of soldier still exist, any more than that of statesman, or king, or poet or intellectual, supplanted as these have been by surrogates, so that all that's left among the traditional professions is that of licensed whore. And even the public whore is close to being regulated out of existence, with the woman being required twice each session, at foreplay and at climax, to shout a politically knowledgeable Heil Hitler. As for me, I can see myself ending as a pacifist, not because I set that much store by the inherently fragile artifacts of this world, no, because I want to officiate at the funeral of a damnable lie, the lie that the concept of soldier can be infinitely further perverted. This afternoon, I was brought to a hearing. This was done before a captain wearing the insignia of a former non-com, and the look of a decent Bavarian petit bourgeois. He could have been a clerk behind a post office counter, or in a busy law office. Still, when I declared that what had brought me here was foul denunciation, the machinations of a low intriguer, these attractive features contorted and he blared at me like a tuba. I waited until all this lung power was exhausted, and then, looking him earnestly in the eyes, ventured that at the moment a defenseless man stood there before him, with emphasis on at the moment. Then there flooded down on my head a veritable torrent of accusation. I had falsely stated my rank, to which I responded that in the course of my life I had waded in too much blood to give undue importance to rank. That in the course of my earlier admission of wrongdoing, I had made light of the people's militia. With my statement before me, I proceeded to show that the very opposite was the case. That I had organized a demonstration of women protesting against the removal of crucifixes from public buildings, did not say Heil Hitler, when I should have, and downplayed the value of the German currency. I answered with a question, was I being questioned here under military or party auspices? Also, in the matter of the currency charge, could I get further details? This was not a fruitful approach. What followed was a torrent of invective that burst over me like burning lava, covering all argument, all protest. I was silent. They took me away. But I was not to get off so lightly. They called in the major, and when I saw him I knew, only a higher power could save me now. He was an apparition, a man-doll, a frightful stumbling puppet smashed by shot and shell and put together with prostheses. Nothing worked naturally, nothing was normal, the man was a mechanical horror. And in the eyes, that sadism. I know the type. I saw them in the time of the Free Corps. These unholy apparitions, filled with sadistic rage, moved through that time as they do today, officers now under the Nazi regime, mutilated beings involved in inconceivable crime. Again now I am alone. Far away, over that house and land I call home, there would be the last red flash of sunset, inside here, the clumping of boots as the food detail goes by. Strange how quickly a man is brought down to the lowest levels of preoccupation in prison through trying any trick to make life here easier. You learn to clean the malodorous corners of the cell without disgust, and to lie down on the insect-infested straw mattress without a qualm. Your suit, measured by a London tailor whose greeting on the occasional shopping trip could have been directed to a reigning prince, is rubbed to threads on the splintery plank bed, and you hardly care. And what a thing it is that these little tricks, while they do indeed make your life easier, swiftly bring you down to jailhouse level. Some well-meaning bloke slides back the lock on your door, and freedom suddenly is the equivalent of being out of your cell, walking up and down alongside the door. You don't actually do it, the thought has to suffice. The following day, now further enmeshed in this society of the imprisoned, I myself slide back the bolts and thus for the first time get to see, face to face, this brotherhood of the damned, my neighbors in the concrete cells. Until now they have been known only by their signals, the tapping on the walls and the code I quickly learned. Beyond the flat, blank sales clerk visages, beyond the dead white, stupid faces of the little underlings and clerks dropped into army uniforms as guards is this polyglot commune of prisoners. Among these, Poles, Czechs, even Danes and Norwegians, tumbled into this place like dice from a cup, are those who provide the balm of real people, as though, in a foreign country, one were to hear for the first time the sound of one's own language. A tearful little fellow, rather insufficiently attired in a shirt of the Moroccan Guards, but as hairy and lumbering as a bear, in deep depression. He had overstayed his leave by 5 days, seduced by a local maiden and the carp fishing and eating pleasures her family's pond afforded. An honest, Dieneric horseface, unfortunately a more serious case. Filled with hatred against these latter-day communards, he wandered in civilian limbo for 5 months, and then was picked up at a military checkpoint, where he was also found, unfortunately, to be carrying a loaded revolver, yes, a very grave matter. The soldier who arrested him, tool of this proletarian militarism that he is, actually whispered to him in an access of humanity that he now regretted having done so. Indeed, the case is serious, it could even cost him his head. Croat, is accused of having had dealings with the Russians somewhere on the periphery of the empire, a bonehead drafted and flung at random into an army unit with which he has as much connection as I do with a man from Mars, actually, a young fellow of quality, friendly, likable, even somewhat cultivated by the standards of this pesthole. In the dark corner of the cell, alongside an infested straw mattress, we talked for a time about his distant homeland. He described how the Serbs evacuated his peaceful winegrowers' village by the Danube because they wanted to settle their own people there. Believe me, the harvest was good, the barns were filled with wheat, the vats full of rye, the shed floors covered with sheaves of maize and tobacco. That spring, actually, there had been rumors that we were going to be forced off our land, and these rumors were believed by our gloomy old folks. But we who were the youth laughed at these fears, and were confirmed in our confidence by the Serbian officials, who vehemently denied any such plans. Yes, just 2 days before it all became reality, they announced strict penalties for spreading rumors of the kind. So you can imagine what a shock it was when it actually happened. We were given just 12 days to leave our village, our vineyards, the rich harvest in our sheds. We were told that in exchange for leaving behind all our goods, all our property, all our farm machinery, we would find the equivalent in Bosnia, with completely equipped farmsteads and rich crops, in short, that we would not regret the change. The old people knew what the truth was. That same night many cut their throats, others hanged themselves, or drowned themselves in the Danube. As for the rest of us, we let them dump us into a miserable typhus-ridden collection point. Then we were shipped in sealed freight cars, and for 14 days lived and died in the stench of our own feces and the discharges of the dead. Once arrived, part of us were locked into the freezing cold room of a large estate, others were thrown into the half-destroyed greenhouses of an abandoned nursery, while a third group was put into barracks filled with lice, formerly used for people ill with typhus. These, sir, were the equally prosperous farms we had been promised. The old regime, I answered, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, would not have been less cruel. Do you imagine that all it required of you was to pledge allegiance to the double eagle, the symbol of the imperial throne in Vienna? Granted, sir, and still one wants to lead one's own life. He meant by this one's own nationalist life, the insanity which has spread from 1789 on, in whose flames Europe will be consumed, and which could only burn so destructively because the milder flame of a generalized European intellectuality, the flame of those who seek God on this earth, has been extinguished. I lay down sadly. I have been born too early on this planet. I will not survive this insanity. Sad days, of wind coming through the cracks in the walls, of the disappearance of the faint autumn sun, of the coming, so quickly, of the apocalyptic hour of dusk in this stone coffin. While the light lasts, until the day dies, I go on reading, despairingly, these utterly stupid memoirs, these diaries suffused with a special Parisian arrogance, these orgiastic survivals of the rotting away of the Napoleonic concept, whose death throes have for so long poisoned our lives. Formerly, there was a wide area of differentiation, now, there is total equality. Formerly also, there was something called fate, now, it is the daily wage. Renown, what is that? Weigh out a kilo of renown for me, how much? We buy bridges for our mouths, cultivate intestinal flora in our stomachs. We parcel out pieces of life among each other, leave each other less and less of the air, from generation to generation leave behind an increasingly mishandled and chaotic world. The princess. She rides a bicycle the way the workers under her father, the king, did, and they barely move aside when she comes by, and may or may not greet her. So, in 1915, wrote the man who, shortly afterward, driven of course by the women of his family with their need to bulk large in the world, joined the camp of these same mass men. On one of the first cold days of the year, I was called to a hearing, and was astounded at the changes which had occurred behind the scenes. Where just a couple of days earlier there had been icy northern winds, now a warm breeze caressed me, where only yesterday this crude, bellowing captain yelled at me like a top sergeant, now he dealt with me with the utmost consideration, and I was almost fearful that he would end this evening hearing by releasing me with a good-night kiss. The mystery was soon resolved. Out of the office of the major in charge, clad in a fantastic black leather overcoat bearing the emblem of the SS, came General DTL, and it is to him that I owe the bringing about of this miracle. A decade younger than me, he chided me gently, a discourse which of course I did not know whether I was to take seriously, or whether it was meant to ring well in his own ears. In any case, the effect on the corporal-turned-captain was noteworthy. "Does the Herr General require a car, or does he intend to go by foot?" said in true Prussian barracks jargon, and with a passion that gave one to think that in the next moment this booted lackey would either fall on his face before him or simply jump up and disappear into thin air. And so occurred the miracle which I, just an hour earlier, entombed in my cell, had not dared to conceive. I was to be released that very night. I was let out, had myself locked back in, and experienced what probably every prisoner about to be released goes through, hours of uncertainty in which the fear is that at the very last minute something will happen. You look, ridiculously, for a sign, anything to relieve the tension, the end time, which is almost as bad as the first hours in the shock of jail. Luckily for me, an air raid shortened the time, gawked at like animals from the zoo by assorted typists, laundresses and kitchen help. We were taken down to a narrow, low-ceilinged cellar where pipes connected with all the various water and toilet outlets. Presumably, We would be better off drowning in excrement-filled sewage than being split apart by shrapnel fragments in the open air. Through the cellar window I could make out a small piece of sky and a somewhat larger section of the caserne courtyard. Ah, unrelieved monotony of these endless windows, bareness of sheds, apocalyptic ugliness in every direction, a hideousness which seems to be the very essence of militarism. They hate everything which might carry a hint of spirituality and beauty. What they worship is a fetish, probably something like a grotesquely enlarged dice cup. And out of this affinity for the ugly they have constructed a religion at whose shrine all the world is to worship. No, they will be rooted out, they will be pursued remorselessly, reduced to their true level by every conceivable and inconceivable means that can be found to humiliate them, because only then, when all memory of them has been blotted out, will there be peace in the world. 2 hours later, leaving the caserne, I had the feeling of a man buried in a mass grave, filthied, filled with unmanning memories. An ancient superstition forbids it that the person who has emerged into freedom look back, lest he be returned. Indeed I kept on going, never looking back, but then my friend the corporal came running up with a brush and cleaned off my dusty coat, saying, "Make this thing end soon. For you, my young friend, in the name of our shared hatred, in the name of tormented mankind, in the name of the world." Once at home, I learned what was thought to be happening to me, and what indeed would have happened had it not been for the intervention of DTL.